In this lesson, we are going to create a small Laravel CRUD application. And if you are not familiar with the term CRUD, it stands for creating, reading, updating, and deleting data, specifically when it comes to a database. To be specific, in this video, we are going to build a micro-blogging platform where people can share their thoughts and status updates. So let's get started. We'll start by creating the application models and migrations. We already have the user model along with its migration created, so we'll just move ahead and add one more model, the post model. We will use the sale artisan command to create the model class. So we're going to call vendor bin sale artisan, and then we're going to call the make model command. We'll call our model post, and then we will use the M and C options. The M and C options here are telling Laravel to create a migration file and a controller along with the post model. So let's hit enter and let Laravel create the files for us. And here we go. Let's go back to PHP Storm and make sure that everything was created properly. So under app, HTTP controllers, we can see a post controller created. And then under app models, we can see a post model. And inside database migrations, we can see a create post staple migration file. We'll start by updating the migration here and adding more columns. We're going to need a column of type text, and we're going to call this column content. This is where the content of the post will be stored. Another column that we are going to need is one to hold the user ID, which is the user that the post belongs to. And for that, we are going to use the foreign ID method and call the column user ID. And we are good to go. Let's go back to the terminal and call the sale artisan migrate command. And now our database is ready to host our application. For the sake of this tutorial, we need to create 2 dummy users and 2 dummy posts. And to do that, we can use the create method on the user model or on the post model to create the models that we need, but I'm going to show you a different way. Laravel includes the ability to seed your database with data using seeder classes. Those classes are under database seeders. By default, a database seeder class is defined for you. Inside the class, we are going to create our user and post model instances. To do that, we will go to the run method and remove this line here, and to not waste your time, I'm just going to paste these code blocks. So inside the database seeder class, we have the run method, and inside the method we are creating a user with the name Muhammad, another user with the name Zain, and we are going to create a post that belongs to the first user and another post that belongs to the second user. Now let's go and seed the database by calling the dpseed command. So we'll go to the terminal and then call vendor bin sale artisan dp seed. And that's it. To verify that the database now has 2 records for users and 2 records for posts, let's use the tinker command to start an interactive shell with our application container. And to do that, we are going to call sale artisan tinker. Now we can write any code and tinker will evaluate it for us and return the results. So let's call the user class and call the all method. We hit enter and we can see that tinker evaluated the user all code that we wrote, and it returned the collection of user models that exist in the database. And in our case here, we have only 2 models. So let's check the post model and call all, enter, and we can see that we have 2 models. One that belongs to user with ID 1 and another that belongs to user with ID 2. Perfect, we are now ready to start developing our application. We have the model files ready, we have the controller files ready, and we have the migration files ready. We have the seeding data, and we're ready to go. Now it's time to start creating the routes, controllers, and views. Inside this application, we need 6 routes. One to display the list of all posts, another to show a form where you can create a post, and another route to handle this form submission, and the 4th route is to show a view or to show a form where you can edit a post, and another route, the 5th route, is one to handle the form submission of the update post form, and finally the 6th route is one for you to delete posts. Let's create these routes in our web.php routes file and set the action for each route to a specific method in the post controller class. So let's get rid of this dummy route here and call the route class and call the get method on that class. We're going to start by implementing the root route, and we will point this one to post controller and a method inside this controller class called list. We will need another route for the create post form. This one will be /create, and it's going to trigger the create method. Another route that responds to the post HTTP method, and it will trigger the store method on the post controller. So now we have the route that will list all posts, and the route that will create a post or will show a form where you can create a post, and another route that will actually handle the form submission and create a post. We'll create two more routes, one to display a form where you can update a post, and this one will respond to /posts and then a post route parameter, and this one will trigger the edit method on the controller, and another route with the post HTTP method that responds to post as well, and this one will trigger the update method on the controller. And finally, we need one more route that listens to the delete HTTP method, and it's going to trigger the destroy method on the controller. Route parameters here represent a value that Laravel is going to send to the controller method that the route is going to trigger. We will learn more about that shortly. Now let's go to the controller and create those methods. We'll start by creating the last method, and then we have the create method, store method, edit method, and this method is going to receive a post route parameter. We're also going to need an update method that receives a post as well, and finally a destroy method. Perfect, we now have the routes ready and the controller ready. Let's start by implementing the list method inside the post controller. This method should return a view as a response. The view would have a list of all posts in the system. I already have the HTML ready inside the list.plate.php view file. We can see here that it have a list with two dummy views. Let's return this view inside the controller method. So return view list. Now let's go to the browser and trigger this route under the root route, and we can see that the view is displayed for us. It just has a list of dummy posts, and each post has two buttons, one to update the post and another to delete it. Now let's start returning real data. We're going to declare a posts variable here, and we are going to call the post model and call an order by disk method. This method will initiate a query that will order the posts in the database in descending order, and we are going to use the created add field for that. Next, we are going to call the get method, and then we are going to pass the posts variable to the view. And to do that, we are going to pass another argument to the view helper, define the variable name that we want to pass to the view, and then give it the value that's stored inside the posts variable. Now inside the view, we are going to get rid of this dummy data, and instead we are going to call the for each plate directive and close it here in for each. And inside the for each directive, we are going to call posts as post, and inside the data we're going to replace the dummy content with the actual post content. And to do that, we are going to use this curly braces syntax, and we will write post and then content. Now let's go ahead to the browser and refresh. And we received an error, undefined variable posts. If we go to the controller, post controller, we can see that we have a typo here. So we fix it to posts and refresh, and we can see that the view is currently pulling data from the database instead of the dummy static content. Now let's go back to the view, and we can see here that we need to print the username instead of printing static user string, and we need to update the location of the link of the update button and the location of the form of the delete button. Let's start with the buttons first. We're going to use the curly braces syntax, and call the URL helper here and point this route to the /posts and then pass the post ID here. So when a user clicks on the update button, it's going to point them to /posts/post ID. And as for the delete form, we're going to do the same. Use the curly braces syntax here, call the URL helper /posts post ID. And because HTML forms doesn't support the delete HTTP method, we're going to use the post method. And inside the form itself, we are going to use the method plate directive. This method accepts the name of the HTTP method that we wish to use. In our case, it's the delete HTTP method. Now let's go back to the browser and refresh. And if we hover over the edit or the update button here, we can see that the browser displays the URL localhost/posts/1. And if we hover on the other button, we can see that it's pointing to localhost posts 2. So now the update and delete buttons are working. Let's take a look at how we can display the username. Now to display the username, we need to query the user's database table and find records that has an ID that matches the user ID attribute of each of these posts. And Eloquent allows us to do that using relationships. Model relationships are like model attributes, but instead of returning raw data from a database table, it's going to return a model instance, another model, which represents the relation between the post model and the user model in our case. To define relationships, we can do that inside the model class. So we are going to go to the post model class and define a user relationship. Let's do that. We'll go to PHP Storm and go to the post model. And inside this model, we are going to declare a function called user. Inside this function, we are going to return this belongs to, because that's the type of the relationship between the post and the user. A post belongs to a user. Inside the belongs to method, we are going to pass an argument, which is the name of the user model class. And that's all we need. Now let's go back to the list.plate.php file, and instead of using a static user string here, we are going to call post username to display the username. But before we can do that, let's go to the controller and update the Eloquent query by using the with method here. And we tell Eloquent to return the user relationship along with each post that it returns from the database. Now let's go to the browser and refresh, and we can see that it's now reading the username from the database instead of the dummy static string. Perfect. We are now done with the first route. Let's move to the other route that shows the create form. I already have this view already. So if we go to PHP Storm and see create.plate.php, we can see that it's a form that has a select element, a text area element, and a button element to submit this form. Let's update this view, and we'll first start by updating the form action. We're using the curly braces, the URL helper, calling /create. And now under the select element, we don't want to use static data like this. We want to read the users from the database. So instead of this, we are going to use the for each directive again, and for each users as user. Inside for each, we are going to use the username as the value for the option element, user ID, and the username as the display. And that's all we need. Let's go to the post controller, and under the create method, we want to return the view. So we will return view. The name of the view is create. And we want to pass the list of users from the database. So users, user all, to query all the users from the users table, and we are going to pass this variable to the view. So users. Now let's head to the browser and go to the create route, and we can see the form displayed here, and it's returning data from the database. And that makes our view ready to submit this form. Let's start to hit create. And we can see that we have an error called page expired. And this error is Laravel protecting us from cross-site request forgery. which is a type of attacks that's very common. We're not going into details of this type of attacks in this video, but I'm going to show you how to fix that. So let's go to the create plate template, and inside the form we are going to call the CSRF plate directive. So again, CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. This should fix it. So let's go back to the browser and click on create, and we can see that we no longer get this error. But we haven't implemented the CRUD that will handle the form submission. So let's do just that. We'll go to the post controller, and inside the store method we are going to implement the form submission. We need to collect all the data coming with the request, and we will use this data to create a post model. To collect all the data, we can use the request helper and call the all method on that helper. And then we are going to call the post model create method. However, passing data directly from an HTTP request to the database or to Eloquent is quite dangerous. Never do that. You must validate any data first before passing it from the HTTP layer to the database layer. And Laravel ships with a validation component that has a lot of validation rules that you can use to ensure the data coming from HTTP requests is safe to be stored in the database. So let's go ahead and validate the data first before storing it into the database. And to do that, instead of calling the all method, we are going to call the validate method. And this method accepts a single argument, which is the rules that we should apply. In our case here, we need to apply rules for two fields, the user ID field and the content field. For the user ID, we need to verify that it is an integer, and we need to verify that the value of the user ID actually exists in our users table. And to do that, we are going to call the rule class and the exists method. This method accepts the name of the table as a first argument. In our case here, it's the users table, and the name of the column that we are going to check. In our case, it's the ID column. So again, this rule here will ensure that the user ID passed with the request matches an ID inside the users table of our database. And now let's move to the content field, and this field must be a string. That's the only validation rule that we want to apply. And now that the data is validated, we can pass it directly to the create method. Using this set of rules, we are ensuring only two attributes will be passed to the model create method, which is the user ID and the content. If the user provided any other attribute, it will be completely ignored. Only the user ID and the content will be passed, and it will be validated against these rules before it's passed to the post create method. Now finally, at the end of the store method, we want to redirect the user to the posts list page after a new post is created. So we're going to return a redirect, and we want to redirect them to the root route. Now let's go to the browser and check the create route, and we're going to create a post with the user Zane, and this user is going to say hello as a content. Let's press create, and we see an exception. The exception type is mass assignment exception. And this is actually Laravel protecting us from passing unvalidated data to the create or update method of our Eloquent models. But since we are already passing validated data, we don't need this protection from Laravel. So let's go ahead and disable it. To do that, we are going to go to the post model and declare a class property, a public property called guarded. And we are going to tell Laravel to only guard the ID field. It should let us fill all the other fields of this post model. So let's go back to the browser, select user Zane and say hello in the content, hello, and click on create. And here we go. The form was submitted and it was handled by the Laravel route, and it stored the new message or the new post in our database and redirected back to the posts list view where we can see the message that we just created. Let's go to the create route again and create another message. So Muhammad says hi and hit create, and here we go. The new message was just printed. Perfect. Now let's move to the next method in the controller, post controller, which is the edit method. This method is going to return the edit view along with the instance of the post model we are editing. I already have this edit view here, so edit.plate.php, which is an HTML form that has a text area and a submit button. So let's prepare this view first before we can implement the route in the controller. We'll start by updating the form action. We use the URL helper, point it to posts with the post ID, and then we need to call the CSRF plate directive, and inside the text area we need to print the value of the post content to display it to the user before they can edit it. And I think that's all we need. Maybe just update this to update post instead of create post. Now let's go to the controller to implement the edit method. The edit method is going to return a view. This view is called edit, and we need to pass a post variable to this view. But actually, if we do this, the post variable that is passed to the view will only have the post ID, because in the route definition here, we have the edit route with the post route parameter. In the URL, here will be the place where users provide the post ID. So this variable here will have the post ID, not the post itself. To give the view the post object itself, we are going to override this variable and call post find post. So this will query the database and find a model with an ID that matches the ID that's passed to the route. Let's test that in the browser and maybe update this post here. And here we go. We can see the content of the post displayed, and that means that the view received the instance of the post model. When injecting a model ID to a route controller action, you will often need to query the database to find this exact model instance before you can pass it to the view. And Laravel have a convenient way to do that automatically for you behind the scenes, and it's called route model binding. Let's check this out. So instead of using the post model class to find the model by using its ID, we are going to type in the post method argument with the post class. So here post, and we type in it, we can remove this line here. And Laravel will now do that for us behind the scenes. It will find a post model with the given ID and assign it to this post variable. Let's test our theory and go to the browser. Let's go back to the list and then click on the update button here. And as we can see, it pointed us to the form and it was able to grab the post instance from the database and return the post content for us. Perfect. Now let's go to PHP Storm and implement the update method here. We'll also use route model binding to get an instance of the post by type hinting the post variable. And we'll also collect the data from the request and validate it using the validate method. And in this case, we only need, or we expect, a single field, which is the content, and this field to be of type string. And then we are going to use the post instance and call the update method on it, update, and pass the data that needs to be updated. Finally, we are going to redirect to the root route here, same as with the store function. So let's test that. Go to the browser. I'm starting to learn Laravel. I like it, so let's update it so much and hit update. And we can see here that the message was updated. I'm starting to learn Laravel. I like it so much. Perfect. Now we only have a single route to implement, which is the route to delete a certain post. So let's go to the PHP Storm, and then under the destroy method, we're going to use route model binding by type hinting and then call the delete method on the model. And finally return a redirect back to the root route. So let's go to the browser and maybe delete this message here. Oh, we can see that the URL is not correctly set. So let's go to the list plate template and check the form action. We need a backslash here as well. So let's go back, refresh, and delete this message. Page expired, and we already know what this error is for. So let's go to the form here and call the CSRF plate directive, CSRF. Now let's go back, refresh, and then delete this message. And here we go. It was deleted. And that's it. We have a fully working CRUD application up and running. with database migrations, seeding, validation, form submission, and everything around CRUD. At this point, I highly advise that you go ahead and implement your own CRUD application using Laravel. Maybe implement a more advanced micro-plugging platform with replies on posts, maybe with filtering posts based on the user or based on the date, maybe with tagging posts with different tags, and so on. And to do that, you need to read the documentation of several parts of the Laravel framework, and I leave relevant links in the description of this video. So go ahead and implement this application. If you have any questions or if you face any problems, please leave your questions and leave your concerns in the comments section down below, and I will do my best to answer all the questions. See you in the next video.